Turn it up. Look, 100 years after 100 years, they done lied to us about this and that. Told us all we from Africa. I made fiction characters turn into facts. Heard you tell me, then it was not. Knowing goddamn well that trick was capped. My wife and I wrote a book about it. It's a book with knowledge, evidence, and fact. And my other book got them haters shook, cause it's helping my people take a closer look at their backgrounds and the background, showing my people where they supposed to look. Showing my people where they get it from, where they hit it from, all sorts of angles. When it comes to this research, you must please first, don't trust strangers. Find out all on your own is what I highly recommend and suggest. And if you looking for answers and content about me, I highly recommend you the best. Which is my website at the link you see just across the screen. Don't let it miss you, I make it simple. I double down on that black and white, it's too official.
Is the name New Orleans an offensive term? The answer is yes if you look at it from a historical standpoint. Now, it is essential to note that the information that I'm about to present to you has been purposely swept under a rug inside of a room of information to be kept hidden from those who dare attempt to find it. So my wife and I triple checked all areas of this room of information while investigative researching to ensure we did not overlook spots where any dirt could hide. And before we left this room spotless, we discovered a few things that you may or may not be aware of. What is commonly known about the history of New Orleans is that it is a territory colonized initially by the French dating back to 1717. Anonymous writers of American history would claim that Louisiana was originally occupied by the indigenous people of America, or American Indians, but somehow a Scottish monetary reformer named John Law brought his Company of the West with him and eventually took control of Louisiana in 1717. Keep in mind that people assume that a French military was with him, but the anonymous writers and publishers of American history allows its readers, teachers, and even indoctrinated students to assume that it was a hostile takeover that occurred without any primary evidence to present, only just this story. So the story says that John Law and his Company of the West, along with French explorer Jean-Baptiste Le Moyne de Boinville, were entrusted with finding a safe location to call their newly found territory within Louisiana, and decided to clear a forest area near the Mississippi River and call it New Orleans. Again, let's not forget that this story forces people to use their imagination in believing that these so-called explorers, who were actually spies, were able to take control over an already occupied landmass during their first visit, or intrusion rather, without stating if they had an actual military with them officially, and the names of those soldiers that survived and those that did not. One can only use their imagination to fill in the blanks. So, by some accounts from some anonymous writers of American history, New Orleans was named after France's regent or governor named Philip II, and he also held the title of Duke d'Orleans. Notice the order of the spelling here, which this translate in English as Duke of Orleans. I'll be returning to this point later on in the segment, so keep this in mind. Now, jumping ahead to the early 1830s, minstrel shows became a popular form of entertainment for foreigners that have already migrated to America, and even for those foreigners that were still immigrating to America from their motherlands of Eurasia and Africa. These minstrel shows consisted of pale-skinned performers that would purposely place black makeup all over their faces, often referred to as blackface, in order to racially imitate the indigenous people of America, or rather the Neji, who are now misclassified by the government as African Americans or blacks, in comedic ways through racially motivated jokes, stereotypes, dances, ballads, and songs, just to name a few. All of these shows were performed at special locations throughout the country, usually outside in public parks where only the foreigners resided, for example. Then eventually they were held inside Christian churches and denominational schools to entertain their children. And as time carried on, they performed at newly transitioned colleges and universities that were still owned and operated by Christian churches. Many of these colleges and universities implemented glee clubs in order to keep their students entertained, because performing music was well received by every young child. So, since the staff and students admired the minstrel shows, because that was truly their only entertainment during this time period, they recited multiple folk songs religiously that they mastered by watching the minstrel shows within their schools. Most of the lyrics were rewritten, and the musical notes were also recorded on paper for the accompanying piano player of each school. For example, one of the popular minstrel show folk songs called Levy was utilized traditionally inside of the College of New Jersey, which later became known as Princeton University, where the Princeton Glee Club and the alumni and students of Princeton University would all sing with pride and joy. Obviously, I'm pointing out this particular song for a reason, as the university sang multiple songs from out of their university songbook called Carmina Princetonia ever since the university's inception, along with their alarming support of the racially charged minstrel shows. Now, this was the first official publication of the minstrel show folk song called the Levy Song, inside of this songbook by Martin R. Dennis and Company in 1894. However, this song was well known across the country ever since the 1830s. I'm going to point out a few things about this song that informs the public that the name New Orleans was actually used in an offensive manner. The spelling of the words, which are the lyrics to the song, was written down to reflect their racist way of imitating our people's dialect. So I'm going to recite these lyrics in a way that you can understand them. It says, quote, "I once did know a girl named Grace. I'm working on a levee. She done brung me to this sad disgrace. Oh, working on a levee. I've been working on the railroad all the live long day. I've been working on the railroad to pass the time away. Don't you hear the whistle blowing, rising up so early in the morning? Don't you hear the captain shouting, dinner, blow your horn? Sing a song, oh the city, blow that cotton bell. Nigga ain't half as happy as when he's out of jail. Norfolk for their oyster shells, Boston for their beans. Charleston for its rice and corn, but for niggas, New Orleans." For educational reference, here is an audio recording from the year 1927 of this song. Just note that foreigners of pale skin were singing it, and also note how they pronounce the lyrics of the song.
I once did know a girl named Grace. I'm waiting on the levee. He done brung me to this sad disgrace. I'm waiting on the levee. Sing a song of cities for all that cotton bale. Nigger ain't half so happy as when he's on the tail. Norfolk for his oyster shells, Boston for his beans, Charleston for his rice and corn, but for nigger, New Orleans. Thou work it hard, the day's long. I'm working on the levee, but that's my life, and this my song. I'm working on the levee, sing a song of cities, roll that cotton bale. Nigger ain't half so happy as when he's out of jail. Norfolk for his oyster shells, Boston for his beans, Charleston for his rice and corn, but for nigger, New Orleans. on the railroad all the live long day. I've been working on the railroad just to pass the time away. Don't you hear the whistle blowing right up so early in the morn? Don't you hear the captain shouting, Piner, blow your horn? Yes, I've been working on the railroad all the live long day. I've been working on the railroad just to pass the time away. Don't you hear the whistle blowing right up so early in the morn? Don't you hear the captain shouting, Piner, blow your horn? Yes, blow your horn.
Notice how the lyrics of this 1927 version of the song are not in the same order as the lyrics of the 1894 version. Also, the tone of the song changes after a particular point. This is an indicator that the Levee song consists of two old folk songs combined that were performed by entertainers of the minstrel shows of the 1830s and beyond. I mentioned earlier that the lyrics were rewritten. In fact, the two songs were called the Levee Song and I've Been Working on a Railroad. However, upon further investigation, the I've Been Working on a Railroad part of the song was always a part of the original Levee song. It was even later borrowed and another verse was added to it to become the song called Somebody's in the Kitchen with Dinner and not Dinah. So, the initially published 1894 Levee song is in fact the original minstrel show version of the 1830s. And you would think it's straightforward, but it carries a totally different meaning than one may assume. The term levee has a double meaning. It's commonly known as an embankment built to prevent the overflow of a river. It's usually accompanied by a railroad. However, the etymology of the word levee derives from the Old French word levy, which means an act of raising, or to raise or collect by authority or compulsion. For example, the French phrase levy en masse. This was used during the French Revolution at a time where they desperately needed to protect themselves from their enemies. And levy en masse was the process of conscripting hundreds of thousands of French people into compulsory military service. This means that the Levee song was a motivational labor recruitment song. It was not a song that was sung while laborers were working. It was hearing the song that moved people to want to work by compulsion. This was during the time when they desperately needed the railroad to travel transcontinental, being as though the convenience of trains allowed for foreigners to continue managing the trade along the Mississippi River. According to Henry W. Brands, a history professor at the University of Texas at Austin, quote, "The Constitution provided the legal framework for a single national market for trade goods. The Transcontinental Railroad provided the physical framework. Together, they gave the United States the single largest market in the world, which provided the basis for the rapid expansion of American industry and agriculture to the point where the U.S. by the 1890s had the most powerful economy on the planet." End quote. I also want to point out the portion of the Levee song where it says Norfolk for its oyster shells, Boston for its beans, Charleston for its rice and corn, but for niggas, New Orleans. Notice how the lyrics will state a place and their associated food, but then it ends with, but for niggas, New Orleans. Does this mean that a people would only be known for a particular place and not a food? No, because that would not match with the lyrics pointing out foods that particular places are known for. So, what does New Orleans mean? Earlier, I mentioned that the lyrics were rewritten, and the majority of it was rewritten in a way they thought our indigenous people's dialects sound to them. This is why it is displayed as Orleans, similar to the French word I mentioned earlier, Orleans. The indigenous people of New Orleans have always referred to their home as Norlands or Norleans, which will be displayed like this. The definition of lean is poor, not rich, destitute of good qualities. And the definition of gnaw means to bite or chew. This indicates that the term Norleans means bad quality food. And then the lyrics of the song, Norfolk for its oyster shells, Boston for its beans, Charleston for its rice and corn, but for niggas, bad quality food. All of this goes back to compulsion, because to truly take control of the mind of a person, you must be able to control what's in their gut.
I'm just here to make you think.